Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Truth About Fat Loss Summit. This is Dr. Eric Zielinski from drericz.com, and I have the privilege of interviewing your host, Dr. Johnny Bowden. And I got to tell you, I consider this an extreme honor, not only to call Johnny a friend and a colleague, but to be interviewing him. He truly is an expert in this field, and he's been around forever. His reputation precedes him, and when I read his bio to you, you're just going to be floored. And the reason why I'm sharing that, folks, is Johnny's put together just the best of the best for you and your family to learn about fat, metabolism, weight loss, and everything that you need to learn to know how to live healthy and strong. And he debunks a lot of the myths out there. But with that said, he's the cream of the crop. And so I want to encourage you all to take a lot of notes, listen to this interview, watch it over and over again, because you're going to learn a ton of stuff. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Johnny's work, I'm going to share with you his past, his history, and we're going to go into the future a little bit because he's doing a lot of great stuff in the health space. So Dr. Johnny Bowden, also known as the Nutrition Mythbuster, is a nationally known expert on weight loss and health. He's appeared on television and radio hundreds of times, including appearances of the Dr. Oz and the Doctor Show. He's a best-selling author of literally 15 books, including Living Low Carb, my personal favorite, The Great Cholesterol Myth, and his latest, Smart Fat, Eat More Fat, Lose More Weight, and Get Healthy Now. And just to digress for a minute, that great cholesterol myth, we're going to talk about that. That is so critical, and that's the reason why it's my favorite. I've done a lot of research on cholesterol, folks, and his insight is very keen and absolutely key for people today to understand. So this is interesting. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Johnny used to be a former professional musician. He has a master's degree in psychology and a PhD in holistic nutrition and is a board-certified clinician by the American College of Nutrition. He has written, contributed to, or consulted on literally hundreds of articles and publications as diverse as the New York Times, the Oprah Magazine, People, InStyle, People, GQ, Forbes, Huffington Post, and on and on and on. His personal story of overcoming addiction is specifically inspiring and will help a lot of people, especially how he overcame ill health to become one of the top nutrition gurus in the country. He inspires audiences all over the world. You're going to love him. He's very fun. He has a lot of moxie, as we like to say, and his delivery is just unbelievable. So, well, Dr. Johnny, welcome to your event, sir.
Thank you. That was very kind, very embarrassing. You did leave out the credential of writing for the National Enquirer a lot. My 17-year-old niece is very impressed with that. Every time they'd have somebody like Kirstie Alley or the Olsen twins, they would, can I comment on that and say if they're really anorexic or if they're really, and she loves seeing my name in the National Enquirer. So we can't omit that credential. Thank you so much. It was very kind of you, a very kind and probably overstated introduction, but I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be interviewed by you as well, and to bring this amazing summit, which is becoming a legacy work for me, something I'm so passionate about and so excited about having, and I'm so glad to be able to be discussing it with you.
Well, Johnny, to be quite frank, I mean, one of the hardest things about this interview is scaling your whole volumes of accomplishments down to a 1-minute intro. I could have read this for 5 minutes. So, folks, if you haven't, go to johnnybowden.com. Check out the website. It's great. Yep, JONNYBOWDEN.com. Check them out there. So, Dr. Bowden, we got to go right into it. I got to have the questions begging to be asked. Why in the world did you start a summit, and why is it called The Truth About Fat Loss? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
So glad you asked. Well, I have been in weight loss and health since 1990. So this is going on 26 years. And when I came into the field, it was all about low-fat diets and getting on the elliptical. And I started my career as a trainer at the Equinox Fitness Clubs, became the dean of the Equinox Fitness Club, Fitness Training Institute, which is the model for how they train trainers. So I was very, very aware of what we were learning and what we were teaching as trainers, as nutritionists, and it wasn't working. And we would see constantly these people who were doing what we believed, and I believed. I was so low fat and anti-cholesterol that I was one of those guys back in the 90s that would order an egg white omelet, and if it came with even a little bit of the yolk, I'd send it back because I was sure that would mean I'd get a heart attack. So I was a true believer. I drank the Kool-Aid. And without going too much into me and my education and my enlightenment and awakenings, I came to see that what we were teaching these people who came to us for help in transforming their bodies and transforming their lives, and for whom this was a painful issue for many people. Weight loss is painful for people. I've seen it ruin lives, and people, walk around feeling like they'll never be the person they really want to be because they just can't lose this weight, and then they tell themselves they're a loser and they can't follow a diet, we do such numbers on ourselves about this. And I watched this and I saw it happening in my own practice, first as a trainer, then as a nutritionist. People were not getting better with what we were telling them to do. So I started looking into this more. I was lucky enough to meet and be mentored by Dr. Barry Sears, who's on the summit, by the way, the guy who invented the zone diet. And we started learning about things like the hormonal effect of food. Wait, that's not what we were told. We were told it's all about calories. We were told it's if you just get on the elliptical long enough, you'll lose weight. Well, that wasn't happening. And then we saw these people who, against our recommendations, were going on Atkins. And I was, like all my colleagues, we were sure these folks were going to die. We'd say to them, you can't do this high fat, high protein. What's going to happen to your cholesterol? What's going to happen? You're going to get a heart attack. You might lose a pound or two. But is it worth your health and what's going to... Except that, Eric, that didn't happen. And people would come back and they'd have better blood lipids and they'd have lower triglycerides, and their doctor would be impressed and say, what are you doing? And then they'd say, well, I went on Atkins, and the doctor would say, you can't do that. And it's like they didn't even believe the evidence of their own senses and blood reports. So I started to, I've always been someone who questions authority. I've never been a follower of the conventional wisdom. I take on the American Dietetic Association all the time. I think they're one of the most destructive organizations in the country as far as our health goes. And so I've always been a kind of skeptic when it comes to authority. And now I really became skeptical. Like, if people are eating all this fat and their cholesterol is going through the roof and they're not dying or getting heart attacks, something we were taught's not right. And I began that, and that's actually what got me to go back to school and get a PhD in nutrition. I was one of these, okay, you don't believe me because I don't have a degree? I'll get a degree and I'll still tell you you're wrong.
That's
so
awesome.
I did that. And I kind of have been, I guess that's why my first moniker in this space was the rogue nutritionist, because I went against the grain on so many things. And now it's become the nutrition myth buster. And I love myth busting. So I have struggled with, what I saw to be true, what I learned from my very thorough reading of the research on cholesterol, on fat, on diets, on weight loss. I learned that this was so much more than just calories in, calories out, and how many minutes you spent on the treadmill. This was about hormones, metabolism, society, social pressures, psychological things like compliance and a sense of agency and belief that you could actually accomplish something. It was about neurotransmitters. It was about gut health, as you well know. We didn't even know about gut health back in the early 90s. Nobody talked about the microbiome. There was no such word that we knew of. So now we understand all these complex things that go into weight gain and weight loss, and all the areas that need to be tackled, from toxins to, gut health, to all the things I just mentioned. And it's been my mission ever since to try to straighten out this myth and get people to take the reins of their own healthcare system, to be the leader of their own healthcare people. I grew up with parents who thought, the doctor knows everything. Oh, but the doctor said so. You said, well, what about omega-3s? Well, the doctor doesn't know what that is. I lived in that, and I hate that. And I still see that to this day. I tell people, you're on a statin. You should probably be taking coenzyme Q10 because the statin drugs completely deplete that, and it's a very important nutrient. They say, I'll ask my doctor. The doctor never heard of it. End of story. So I have been fighting this battle pretty much for 25 years. And my passion with the Truth About Fat Loss Summit was to bring together all these amazing people that I have been interacting with for the last decade or more, people whose work I know, people who are making major contributions and breaking through this very, very destructive myth that weight loss is all about calories in, calories out, and how many minutes of exercise you do a day. It is not just about that. Calories are not the star of the story. Hormones are the star of the show. And I wanted to bring this information to people, not so that they would learn to follow one person, but rather so that they could see the range of opinions and approaches. And I don't expect, there's some of the people on my summit don't agree with each other. There are one of my experts talks about food combining. Many others don't believe in that. Many of my experts talk about lower fat. Well, not many. Not many these days talk about of the cutting edge people talk about low fat diets, but they certainly have different points of view. And my idea here was, let's put this stuff up. Let people hear what we're really talking about when we're talking about weight loss and obesity, and let them see what resonates. Let them see, this guy really speaks to me. This woman really, she hits a chord with me. She's talking about my experience. And let's see if we can get people, not necessarily to follow what I believe, but to be able to take the reins and actually go, okay, I'm going to go to my doctor. This is what I learned. This is what I see. This is what I feel. This is what works for me. I don't care what the book says. You know, when I eat asparagus, I break out in hives. I don't care that it's not in the allergy books. And that's what we see with dairy, with gluten, with all these things. People have very individual reactions to them. And I want people to go, okay, now I know something about myself. Now I know how my body behaves. Now I know what I need to do. And to have some direction and some inspiration from this amazing, amazing group of speakers that I put together. And that's why I'm so passionate about this Truth About Fat Loss Summit. This is not just, you know, some seminar of a bunch of people talking about academic stuff. These are people who are wonderful at actually talking to the people who care about the actual end user, the consumer. They're not doctors talking to doctors or academics talking to academics. They're people who are giving real, actionable advice, real things that you can take home and start doing right now that will make a difference. And some of these clinical gems, I'm telling you, I know this stuff, and I sit here and I take notes and go, oh my God, I didn't know that. Oh my God. And I've been trying some of the stuff that I've been learning in the summit, and I'm telling you, it is a magnificent collection of people. And I wish that everybody could listen to this stuff. You won't listen to all 37 talks, you know, but you'll listen to the ones that grab you. And that's what's important. And that's why I believe in this so deeply.
So talk a little bit, just not too long, because we want to dive into your contribution, because you offer so much insight into this. And I love the fact that we're interviewing you, because you could kind of piece it all together, but offer new insights as well. So, you know, I have 3 children. My wife is pregnant with baby Z number 4. So I get it. They're all my favorite. They all are. I love them all. Right. And I know every interview is your favorite, but if there are 2 or 3 or maybe 4 interviews that everyone just got to listen to, which ones are they?
Man, I'm telling you, I knew you were going to ask that question, and I kind of pondered it last night thinking, okay, who am I going to, when Eric asked me, who are my favorites? It is, you gave a great example with the children. I mean, every one of these people offers a perspective that's slightly different from everybody else. So I always talk about when people ask me, what's the best food to eat? Foods are like friends, you know? I mean, your salmon gives you omega-3s, but it doesn't give you fiber. You know, some friends you want to go to a basketball game with, but you don't necessarily want to talk about your intimate relationship with your wife or husband. So, you know, friends serve different purposes. They're great for one thing. You know, this guy's great to play tennis with, but maybe I don't want him at my wedding. You know, there's a lot of different things about people, and there's a lot of different things about food, and there's a lot of different things about these speakers. Some of them talk brilliantly about the psychological components of weight loss and the stuff we put ourselves through in terms of our brain and our feelings and our emotions and our beliefs. Others talk brilliantly about what's going on in the gut with bacteria. Others talk brilliantly about, you know, what the effect of gluten is on us. Others talk brilliantly about hormones and how they can drive weight gain even when you're supposedly eating everything correctly. So it's very hard to pick one speaker who embodies all of the many areas we go over in the Truth About Fat Loss, but I'll just pick a couple. Mark David and Elizabeth Lombardo are 2 people who I really love. I love it. I picked these people. Nobody, you know, came on the summit that wasn't someone I have interacted with, known their work, and loved and believed in. But these are 2 people I particularly love because they really approach this from the point of view, like not just what's on the plate, but what's in your head. And I've often said that. I've done a lot of videos saying this, that, you know, when we wrote the Smart Fat program, we didn't start with what's on the plate. We start with who's the person who's eating the food. And if you leave that part out of it, you leave a lot on the plate when it comes to you know, effective weight loss. So I love their approach to it. Of course, David Perlmutter, who is one of my personal heroes, the Grain Brain guy who everybody knows from Grain Brain, but I was reading his stuff and listening to his interviews, you know, 15 years ago. I actually showed him a picture of a book that I have in my library that's out of print with his picture on the cover from when he was like in his 20s and 30s, and he flipped out. So, a guy like that who can speak so eloquently about the connection between the brain and the gut and talk about, the usefulness of high-fat diets for keeping brain healthy and therefore by keeping everything else that comes from the brain healthy. He was absolutely brilliant. I love Dr. Tammy. She is less known. And I think that I hope that when people see this summit interview with her, they'll just flip out because her information is so amazing. A little women-centric. Some of my speakers kind of are a little more focused on males, some a little bit more on females. They all have something to offer to both sexes, but there are different specialties. And Dr. Tammy's information about hormones in women, just fantastic. Dr. Anna Kabeka talked about menopause and how things are different. Speaking of menopause, Dr. Jade Teta, who people are going to die when they hear this guy. I mean, he's one of those guys. He's one of those, like in music, when I used to be a musician, I think there would be these people you never heard of, like in music now, Sam Smith singing around. All of a sudden people hear him, they flip out, he becomes a Grammy-winning overnight success. That's what's going to happen with Dr. Jade Teta. This guy is so knowledgeable. He's not only a certified personal trainer, he's a naturopathic physician. He has a beautiful clinic in North Carolina, and he is so articulate when it comes to different strategies at different life stages. So he talks about what happens in premenopause, what happens for men, the andropause. How do those hormones affect how exercise works? How do those hormones affect how we metabolize our food? Should we make different dietary changes at different points in our life? How come the strategies that worked for you so well when you were 20, they stop working? They don't work so good anymore. You and I have probably noticed it. Well, you haven't because you're much younger. But, we
35.
We would pull these all-nighters in college. Most of the people listening to this know about all-nighters. Can you still do it today? No, I don't think so. I certainly can't, and I'm in pretty good shape. I don't want an all-nighter. It's going to kill me the next day. But when I was in college, barely noticed it. So Dr. J talks about how our strategies for weight loss also have to adapt to our different hormonal environment. And this is stuff that people just aren't talking about. And I just feel that I'm so excited. If I'm getting excited, it's because I know how great this information is and how many lives it can actually change.
So your main contribution in this health space is you are the nutrition myth buster.
I am.
Talk just a little bit about that, and let's really transition into how you've done that with your great cholesterol myth and even smart fat, because they're all interconnected.
Sure. Well, I think it really starts with the story I was telling you when I was a mere floor trainer at Equinox and telling everybody to go on low-fat diets and do lots of aerobics. I taught aerobic classes as well, group fitness classes. And of course, I was a personal trainer and began to learn a little bit about nutrition, but basically just what we learned in personal training school, which is the standard, out of date, past its expiration date, actually bad advice about eating low fat, staying away from saturated fat, eating lots of complex carbohydrate, all the stuff that you and I were taught when we were starting out. And so it kind of started, the whole myth-busting thing started exactly in that context that I explained to you a little earlier when I was at Equinox, and seeing people do something very different than what we were taught, and yet it was working better than anything we were giving them. So it got me into thinking something here. Now, you mentioned that I have a master's in psychology. So here's a concept from psychology that's very useful. It's called cognitive dissonance. And it means when you have two ideas that you believe in, but they don't fit together. In other words, it's either you believe this is a round hole and you believe this is a square hole, but you can't have both beliefs together. So this frequently happens when this was a perfect example of cognitive dissonance. We believed that low-fat diets worked and that high-fat diets would cause you to have heart attacks. Yet we saw patients with our very eyes who did not conform to that. They were eating high-fat diets. They were doing everything we told them not to do. Not only were they not getting heart attacks, they were coming back with improved blood tests. This is cognitive dissonance. These two things can't both be true. If the low-fat diet is always the way to go, and here are people doing the opposite and they're doing better, one of those beliefs has to be changed. And that's kind of where I was when I started questioning some of what we had been taught. And to bring it back to cholesterol and fat, which is kind of, been my subject matter for the last 5 years or so, Why were people then told back in those days, and still today, why were they told to avoid fat? Specifically, why were they told to avoid saturated fat? I'll wait a minute while everyone in the audience thinks for a second. If somebody asked you, why don't you eat animal products? Aside from ethical issues and things like that, we're talking health only. Why don't you eat animal products? Why does your doctor tell you not to eat saturated fat? Why do all the health? What's the reason? If you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you will quickly realize the only reason you've been told that is because it raises cholesterol. And because we believe that cholesterol causes heart disease. Ergo, if you eat a lot of fat and your cholesterol goes up and you get a heart attack, that's why you don't eat fat. Well, if the cholesterol hypothesis is not true, what happens to the dietary recommendations of the last 40 years? They crumble like a house of cards because they've been built on the premise that cholesterol causes heart disease and these kinds of fats raise cholesterol. Well, when we delved into the research, we found that wasn't true. Number one, not only does cholesterol not cause heart disease, it doesn't even predict it very well. And this is the thing that the Alice in Wonderland moment that makes me absolutely crazy and want to pull my hair. You look at the studies, and they're all in my book, in my Great Cholesterol book. Every one of them is referenced. Believe me, you can't get to write a book like that with a major publisher where they don't have 3 fact checkers checking every single thing because they just don't want to be liable. So we really, taking such a contrarian position about cholesterol, which is such a bedrock of our whole medical system, lower cholesterol, prevent heart disease. So you're going to go against that. Your publishers, if they're good, as mine were, are going to fact check everything. And we had the studies. Looking at thousands of people who have been admitted to hospitals for cardiovascular events or cardiovascular disease, over half of them have normal cholesterol. It doesn't predict anything. We talk about in my book, we talk about this very famous study, which I hope everyone should know about. I think everyone should know about. It's called the Lien diet heart study. I'll give you a real fast summary of it. They took 605 people who were so sick, they were like an insurance underwriter's nightmare. I mean, they smoked. They were sedentary. They ate what we all thought was a horrible diet. I mean, there was just nothing good about their health. Mostly men, but it was a mixed group. And put half of them on the Mediterranean diet and half of them on the standard American, what they used to call the prudent diet, what your doctor would recommend. Keep your saturated fat low. Don't eat any cholesterol because you know what that does. And, eat lots of the standard advice. And they compared these two groups. So what happened was the Mediterranean group did so phenomenally better. They stopped dying at such an enormous rate that they had to stop the study because they didn't think it was ethical. They said, look, just tell everybody about the Mediterranean diet because clearly that's making a big difference. That's what everybody remembers about the Lien diet heart study. But here's something that I looked into about the Lien diet heart study that people don't often focus on. So here you have this group on the Mediterranean diet, and they're eating better, and they're doing all this stuff, and their risk factors are falling like crazy. What do you think happened to their cholesterol? You would think, if what we believe is true, their cholesterol must have plummeted, right? Because look at them, they're double-digit less risk for heart disease. Their cholesterol didn't budge. It was exactly the same. They just stopped dying. Cholesterol doesn't predict anything. It's just not a good marker. And we put all of our, we talk about political capital, we put all of our medical capital into lowering this marker in the blood, which is actually a molecule that is vastly important for human health. It's the parent molecule for vitamin D. Wonder why we have such vitamin D deficiency in this country. It's the parent molecule for your sex hormones. Wonder why there's such an epidemic of erectile dysfunction at the same time as half the middle-aged men in America on statin drugs to lower their cholesterol. That's where you make your sex hormones from, folks. So this is an important molecule for thinking, for the immune system, for the brain. And all we're doing is putting all our heart disease prevention capital into lowering this molecule when we should be lowering the things that really cause heart disease or really promote heart disease, like inflammation, oxidation, stress, and sugar in the diet. So that was what we took on with the Great Cholesterol Myth. And it came very organically out of my questioning of like, well, wait a minute, if cholesterol is not, why are we avoiding fat so much if, in fact, the thing it's supposed to do doesn't do that? And that's kind of how I got into it. And that's why I think, in a way, Smart Fat, my new book, is really an outgrowth of the great cholesterol myth. We start with saying, hey, this is all a house of cards. Cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. It's not the main risk factor. We're not even measuring it correctly, as we talk about in the book. We're using the old good and bad cholesterol test that's out of date for a good 15 years. We now know that there's 5 different kinds of LDL cholesterol and 4 or 5 different kinds of HDL, and they behave differently, and they respond to different things. And this old notion of good and bad is just completely obsolete. So we're measuring it wrong, and we're tackling it like it's the main risk factor in heart disease, and it's kind of just an innocent bystander. So out of that came, well, if we were wrong to demonize fat, well, let's talk about what were the consequences of that demonization. And I think you and I and everyone listening to this can see the consequences. Go outside. 2 out of 3 people are overweight. 1/3 of them are obese. Our children have an obesity problem that has never been seen before in a major nation. And go to Disneyland, look around and see what people look like. We have an epidemic of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and even Alzheimer's. These are unprecedented numbers, and they are all relatable to the high sugar diet that we consume, including Alzheimer's. They're all related to the high sugar diet we consume, and we consume that diet because we got so afraid of fat. We took all the fat out of our diets. We substituted it with complex carbohydrates, which are basically just processed sugar. So that's why I feel the way I do about cholesterol and fat.
And that makes a lot of sense, Johnny, to that end point about even the gluten-free craze and the paleo craze. A lot of the stuff has a lot of sugar in it, whether it's evaporated cane juice or you name it. And folks, when you look at this no-fat, low-fat stuff, it's loaded with other stuff to make it tasty, because once you take the fat out of something, it gets it out of its balance. It's not tasty, so you got to load it with sugar. And so, I don't want to get conspiracy theory here, but you got to wonder, when statins are top 5 drug prescribed and sold on the planet, it's a $100 billion industry, and that's no exaggeration. You got to wonder the integrity of the advice being given. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, Johnny, I think you'd agree, a lot of doctors, myself included, we went to school with a genuine heart to learn and to help people.
Sure.
Yet I will tell you, when you're at school, you get indoctrinated. And if you're not careful, you will be brainwashed. And it's a shame, because not everyone has this inquisitive nature that you and I and a lot of people on this Fat Summit do, because we question. I mean, we're looking at, okay, what is a myth? What's not a myth? It kind of digress a little bit, but to bring it home, I mean, what kind of take-home advice would you give to the average person in America, like the regular folks listening right now? Regular meaning you don't have like a PhD or MD, you haven't been indoctrinated. I mean, if anything, you've been protected. Let's talk to the folks out there who are overwhelmed by the propaganda. Okay. And how do you help them sift through just the trash to get to the rare nuggets? Beside, of course, watching these events, reading your books. But if they're surfing that internet, what could people do?
Okay, so that's a great question, and here's how I would answer it. Here's how I'm going to answer it. The human genus has been on the planet, not Homo sapiens specifically, but our genus has been on the planet for 2.4 million years. And Homo sapiens, about 120,000 years out of Africa, is what most anthropologists and believe. Agriculture was invented 10,000 years ago. So we didn't even have grains before 10,000 years ago, which is like a moment on the 24-hour time clock. Remember, 2.4 million, 100,000, agriculture. McDonald's didn't become a franchise till 1957. So my take home for everyone listening to this who just wants one thing to think about, it's this. When we construct the ideal diet for human beings, should we take our information for what's worked for the past however many millions of years until we became Homo sapiens, the past 100,000, should we take that? Or should we look at the last 100 years? Which, if you did a 24-hour time clock of all the time that human beings have been on the planet, that's less than a second. My argument has always been, let's look at the foods that sustained us from the beginning. Now, I have a term for this. I call it factory-specified fuel. And what I mean by that is this. When you buy a washing machine, they'll tell you the factory specified soap. What that means is that at the factory, they tested it with this soap and they know it can perform this way with this ingredient. When you buy, any kind of electronic thing that has batteries, there'll be a factory specified battery. That's the one that they tested the unit with. That's the one they know they get the best performance of. Well, we have factory specified fuel. Every creature on the planet does. Squirrels, factory specified fuel is nuts. Lions is cheetahs and hyenas. So we all have factory specified fuel. It's kind of what we were wired to perform best on. When you buy a high performance car, they'll tell you the factory specified gas octane that you're supposed to use because that's what will get you the best performance. Okay. You can take that lion, put him in the zoo and feed him Nabisco chocolate chip cookies, and you'll probably keep him alive, but you're not going to get lion performance out of it. So we humans also have a factory specified fuel. And I kind of call it the Johnny Bowden 4 food groups. Food you could hunt, gather, fish, or pluck, right? If it grew on a tree, if it fell off a tree, if it grew on the ground, if you could hunt it or fish it, it was good for you. And that's how it was for most of our time on the planet. We didn't have things that came in packages. We didn't have things with barcodes. We didn't have things that were made into flour and then packaged with sugar and fat and all kinds of other ingredients and made into something delicious and sold as a healthy snack. We didn't have that. We had, if you could shoot it, if you could fish for it, if you could pick it up off the ground or grab it from a tree, you ate it. And I think if there's one basic principle to take home from this summit, it's we need to be eating real food. Real food. Food your grandmother would have recognized as food. Your grandmother would not have known what a Lunchable is. They've done some studies on this in the blue zones, the areas around the country, around the globe where people live the longest. They look at these 100-year-olds, these centenarians who are in good health. They're not in assisted living. They're out there, milking cows at 2 a.m. or, leading sheep up the hills of Sardinia at 94. Yeah. These are really healthy people. And they showed them some of the foods that we eat. They didn't know what they were. One of them didn't recognize a hamburger. What is this? It's McDonald's. They don't recognize it.
That's awesome.
So I would take home from that foods that your grandmother recognized as foods. That's a good place to start. You and I probably both agree that biochemical individuality is a principle, a bedrock principle in our field, in integrative health and, forward-seeking healthcare. That we know that every person responds a little bit differently. Everybody's thyroid acts a little differently. The number of cells in the pancreas, beta cells that produce insulin, a little bit different. Neurotransmitters, the size of different organs, all a little bit different. So there's no one diet that's going to work for everybody. And it's one of the reasons I love this Truth About Fat Loss Summit, because you'll hear different points of view about what the ideal diet should be. But what you won't hear is anybody telling you to eat processed foods. So we all agree that my personal belief is that even more important than what percentage of fat, what percentage of protein, what percentage of carbohydrates, we all talk about that. There's endless debates about should it be 40, 30, 30, should it be 50, 60, whatever. Much more important than that is the quality of the food you eat. Are you eating real food? I'd rather have a real food diet, and I mean real food. That's maybe a higher in carbs than I would like, or higher in fat than somebody else would like. I'd rather have the real food than have the perfect proportion of protein, carbs, and fat. So I would tell anyone here who's overwhelmed and confused, take everything out of your mind and ask yourself one question. Is the thing I'm eating right now real food, and what is my relationship with it? Am I eating it emotionally? Am I eating it because I'm really hungry, or I'm just trying to kill some time, or I'm bored? Start to learn your relationship to it, and start to learn that start to learn to ask yourself whether this is actual real food that would spoil if I left it outside, that my grandmother would serve. And if you can just start with those two things, my relationship to what I'm eating and the reality of the food that I'm eating, I think you will be way ahead of most people. And if you listen to the summit and add that in, then you're just going to be unstoppable.
Love it. Love it. And for those people, myself included, because, I know what it's like. I'm not going to be able to grow and make every part of every one of my meals. And we love our, store-bought gluten-free bread that doesn't have sugar in it and stuff. But one thing I'm getting from this conversation, Johnny, is to focus on the nutrition label, not for the numbers, but for the letters. Look at the ingredients, not at the proportions. Because I agree 100%. It doesn't even matter what the amount at all says. It matters if I can't pronounce it, I probably shouldn't be eating it. And that's a good idea.
It's a good rule of thumb. I like that rule.
I mean, a lot of us aren't trained in medical terminology. You mentioned a lot about history, anthropology, archaeology even. Let's go evolutionarily speaking. Why was and why is eating fat so important to the human being?
Well, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
There's a theory, we don't talk about it a lot. It's an old ancient, hypothesis that has since been proven true. And it's called the expensive tissue hypothesis. And what it basically means is humans were pretty stupid. We were a little bit better than monkeys for a long, long time. And when our brains, and from an evolutionary point of view, the time at which our brains really began to grow, and we really started to have some brain capacity that differentiated us from our distant ancestors, is when we started eating more omega-3s, when we started consuming fish, when we started consuming animals, the organ meats of animals, we started getting more fat in our system. You have to remember, Eric, well, you know this, many people don't, the brain is 60% fat by weight. 60% of it is fat. So, your grandmother was right, going back to grandmothers, your grandmother's right when she said fish is brain food. It is brain food because it is literally providing incredibly important nutrients that the brain needs to grow, to function, to send neurotransmitters back and forth, all of that stuff. And our brains didn't grow until we started consuming fat. Fat is our number one source of energy. Now, let me explain what I mean by that, because people always use the word energy just as a sort of colloquial thing to mean get up and go. But there's actual cellular energy. There's molecules called ATP, and that is the currency of energy that your body uses from everything from growing fingernails to dancing the Macarena. Anything, this moving my hands, us pushing the Skype button, they all require energy. It's produced in the cell by something called ATP. That's the molecule of energy. Well, your body, your cells will make about 36 molecules of ATP per unit of glucose or sugar. They make 144 plus molecules of energy from fat. Fat is your natural source of energy. You want your body to be a good fat burner, not necessarily a sugar burner. And the problem is that if you look around, or anybody looks at their own body, they'll see, there's a lot of fat storage here. And some people, there's a lot of fat storage there. So if fat's such a great source of energy, how come they're not using it? How come they get on the treadmill and nothing happens? Because they can't access that fat. So it's like if you went to the ATM and you have this enormous bank account, you see all this money and it's in your name, but you don't have the password. So you can't get to it. So all you can do is use the money that's in your pocket to make purchases. Well, the money that's in our pocket to make purchases metabolically is the sugar in our bloodstream. You don't want to be burning that. That's the least important fuel. You want to access those magnificent fat cells that actually have something that the body can produce a lot of ATP from. That's why people who are doing these 6-day marathons, the ultra marathon, not only triathletes, but all are experimenting with higher fat diets, because you don't carry enough carbohydrates to get you through that kind of event. Your body stores about 1,800 calories of carbohydrates as something called glycogen, but it stores about 69 gazillion billion calories of fat. So that's your natural source. That's what you want to be using for energy and for your brain. And you can't really burn fat unless you eat fat. The other reason why eating fat is so important for weight loss has to do with hormones. And we talk about this, probably 5 different people in the summit, if not more, approach this subject. And when people hear it from different voices, said in a different way with different imagery, it starts to sink in. That's why I think it's so important to have this number of people interviewed, because they all approach it a little bit differently, but they're all saying the same thing. And somebody might hear one speaker say it and go, I didn't quite get that. And then they hear another person, they go, oh, I understand what they were talking about. So here's what it is. Your fat storage and your fat loss, fat burning, fat gaining, is all driven by hormones. And the number one hormone in this hormonal symphony in terms of fat gain and fat loss is something called insulin. Okay. Insulin rises when your blood sugar goes up. When you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up the highest, and so does your insulin. When you eat protein, goes up a little. It doesn't even move the needle when you eat fat. So when you're eating more fat, you're controlling your blood sugar and your insulin. Your fat storage hormone, insulin, is not as active. It's not in there shoveling everything into the fat cells and then locking the door so you can never burn it again. So controlling insulin is the holy grail of losing weight. And guess what controls insulin better than anything else? Fat. It doesn't even wake up the insulin producing cells. Nothing happens when you eat fat. Now, I'm not saying you can eat 20,000 calories a day of fat and not gain weight. Obviously, that would overwhelm this system. But the point is, what's the craziness of the American Dietetic Association and all the other health professionals telling us that for weight loss, we should be eating tons of the one macronutrient that drives our blood sugar and fat storage hormone to the roof, and little of the one macronutrient that doesn't even make a difference when it comes to that. It's absolutely Alice in Wonderland crazy. We've been told to eat high-carb diets which drive blood sugar and insulin through the roof and create fat storage. We've told to stay away from high-fat diets which don't even move the needle on insulin. It's crazy.
So Johnny, just so I understand better, get clarification, when you use the analogy of the ATM and the password, the passcode, so you're telling us the passcode to losing fat is eating fat.
That's exactly what I'm telling you.
Love it. Love it. No, love it. That's
exactly what I'm telling you.
And that makes all the sense in the world. And folks, even if you look at it evolutionarily speaking, look at just our instinct, how many of us, when we do go exercise, we do go run several miles, we do whatever we do, a lot of us crave fat. We'll crave, some people eat burgers, or they'll eat an avocado if you're a vegetarian, or they'll get their smoothie with flaxseed or chia seed. You typically don't crave a piece of bread.
Yeah,
I mean, quite frankly.
And, you just reminded me of one of the interviews in the Truth About Fat Loss Summit. Dave Asprey, the inventor of Bulletproof coffee. So most people probably know Bulletproof coffee is some concoction of coffee and butter, right? I mean, that's the basic recipe. Well, why would you put butter in coffee? Why would you put a big load of fat like that in coffee? I'll tell you why. And this is how Dave tells us this story on his interview on the Truth About Fat Loss. Dave used to go on these treks, these personal development things. He'd trek through India, and he'd hire these Sherpas, and they'd hike through Nepal and on the mountains. And the Sherpas used to drink in the morning hot black tea with yak butter. Yaks, those big yak butter. And they'd go and Dave noticed these guys are running on. That's it. They're leaving us in the dust. We're all, Americans in great shape, and these little wiry little Sherpas are just going all day on yak butter and tea. And that's when he kind of realized that you got to eat fat for energy, for mood, for sustenance, for endurance. And I think that's one of the principles we're talking about here. And it's one of the many things you'll learn in the Truth About Fat Loss.
I know it's we only have a couple of minutes. I hate
Sure.
that. Oh my, folks, I'd love to go on for like an hour and a half. We have time for one or two questions. I want to make this good. I'm thinking breakfast. I just can't get it out of my head. I know for myself, if I have, and I used to, a high carb diet with oatmeal, fruit, all the good stuff, I crash. Yet if I have a high fat diet, I feel fantastic. So
Me too.
Give people a couple tips of not nutrition per se, but this smart fat approach. Talk a little bit about the approach that people should take, especially if they're crashing and if they find at 10 o'clock in the morning they need a cup of coffee or they're not going to be able to finish their day of work. I mean, what sort of tips can you give folks breakfast-wise and maybe even lunch, and kind of go from there?
Well, it's a great question. And I myself switch my breakfasts up. I'll go through a period of time when I'm really into the Bulletproof coffee thing, and I do the coffee and butter. And I play tennis, by the way, every morning. Yeah. I'm on the court at 7:45, and I do a minimum of an hour and a half a day. And very often I play 3 hours a day. So I need my energy, and I'm up at the crack of dawn without an alarm clock. And I frequently will just have a Bulletproof coffee type beverage, a coffee with butter or with MCT oil, which we talk about a lot in the summit. And that'll get me, I get the entire tennis match on that, and it's just fine. Other times I'm really into eggs, and I'll do, eggs and avocado, which is a fantastic breakfast. Here, I'm going to come out of the closet on something, and I actually did a webinar on this on my website called Why a Top Nutritionist Eats Bacon. I eat a lot of bacon. Now, people are horrified. How can you eat bacon? Well, I'll tell you how. The bacon is a wonderful combination of fat and protein. It's low calorie, and it's got it's kind of like the perfect protein fat combination. The problem with bacon has to do with the way the animals are raised. And we talk about this a lot, and I've written about this a lot. It's in Smart Fat. It's in my book, The 150 Healthiest Foods. I talk all the time about this, that animal products are only bad when the animal is raised in a toxic environment, like feedlot farms, for example, where they get antibiotics and steroids and hormones, and they're eating grain with pesticides, and it all gets into their fat. When you eat bacon from pastured pork, which is naturally raised, humanely raised, they actually run around, they actually, eat their natural diet, and you don't add nitrates to it, that's a health food. And here's another little tidbit that a lot of people don't know. Everybody's afraid of nitrates. The number one source of nitrates in the human diet is vegetables. There's nothing to be afraid of with nitrates. The problem with nitrates in bacon is that when you take a nitrate, combine it with protein, and combine it with high heat, they form something called nitrosamines, and those are carcinogenic. So, very simple solution. Get your pastured pork bacon without nitrates, make it at relatively low heat. I put mine in the microwave and it comes out fantastic. And you got an amazing breakfast. So I've got my eggs and avocado. I've got my bacon, as sometimes I do. Sometimes I do oatmeal, and I do a lot of fat in it and butter to slow any rise in blood sugar, and it's got a lot of fiber and stuff, so that's really good. And then the fourth, I'll give you one more. We do a protein shake, and we do it a little bit differently. And I talk about this in some videos on my Smart Fat program, but this is basically what we do. We take grass-fed whey protein. We use unsweetened almond milk. We throw in some spinach, and here's a trick that Dr. Stephen Masley talks about on his interview. Because he's a trained chef as well as an MD. You have to freeze the spinach. And the reason for that is if you put the spinach in the protein shake the way it comes, it gets all stringy and gets between your teeth. When you put the frozen one in, it blends in flawlessly. You get all the nutrients. So we put some spinach in. We put some frozen cherries in, dark cherries, which is so anti-inflammatory. We put a big scoop of almond butter, mix it up, and man, you will not even notice hunger till it's past lunchtime. It's very filling. The fat, the protein, the fiber from all of those, and we sometimes throw in a scoop of additional fiber, which even slows the whole blood sugar insulin thing even more. And I'm telling you, Eric, that will keep you going for you will not have that crash in the middle of the morning where you're going to kill someone if you don't get a bagel.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I at a conference I just went to last week, shared a beach house with Magdalena Shalaki from hormonesbalance.com. She's a chef. She made us a steak. I mean, we had like a 16-ounce steak for breakfast. I never had a big steak like that. And I got to tell you, I felt fantastic. We had some fermented veggies. We had some root veggies, and it was great. I'm learning too. I'm open to this. I'm learning.
I totally get that. And let me just close with one thing. Think back to the Wild West days. Think back to the wagon trains. Think back to the cowboys and the people crossing the country to settle California and Oregon. What do you think they ate in the morning around the campfire? Cereal? They ate steak and eggs, dude. Yeah. I mean, and they had to get in the wagon train and go 20 hours fighting Indians. Yeah. I mean, this notion that cereal is a good breakfast is crazy. And it's part of the whole myth-busting thing that we've been told this. And it's the theory of the big lie. If you repeat it often enough and you get enough spokespeople from the American Dietetic Association saying, eat your fruits and vegetables and whole grains, kind of planting in our minds that the grains are just as good as fruit and vegetable. They're not. They're not even fiber heavyweights. We in Smart Fat, we make a very big deal about fiber. It's very, very important. And one of the only drawbacks to most high-fat diets is they don't have enough fiber. Ours does. But the point is, everyone thinks about fiber in terms of cereal and breads, because that's a brainwashing concept. Trust your eyes, go to the supermarket, pick up any bread you like, any cereal you like, and read the fiber. It's got to be on the label. It's part of the nutrition facts label. If you can find a cereal or bread that has more than 2 grams of fiber or 3 grams of fiber, I will eat the wrapping it comes in. It just doesn't happen. Compare that, and it comes with all that sugar and starch, which does all those things to your blood sugar. Awesome. How about an avocado, which has 8 grams of fiber? How about beans, which have 11 to 17 grams of fiber? Forget this bread and cereal stuff. It's just nonsense. It's all part of the brainwashing that has kept us fat, sick, tired, and depressed. And that's really my mission in The Truth About Fat Loss, is to break these myths and give people real information that they can use to really transform their health and their life.
Love it. Love it. Johnny, I love you. I appreciate you, man. It's been such a privilege to get to know you. Folks, I'm currently wrapping up my 3rd and my 4th summits. I know what it takes. Johnny's put together a lot of effort, and oftentimes it's thankless because we give it away. We want you guys to listen and to be blessed and to learn. But I just want to thank you. I mean, sincerely, on behalf of everyone listening, thank you for all the effort and the time and the money. It's an expense that a lot of folks don't recognize. And
You're not kidding.
And what I recognize too is what you've done is it's interesting versus me. I mean, I'm 35. So I'm in the up and comer, where I see this more as your legacy. I see this is something that you're leaving. This is your opus magnum, so to speak, because all that you've learned for the past 25 years, it seems to be culminating in this event. So I see that as very unique in versus some of the other projects that you've done. So that's real cool. Thank you. Folks, take it to light. And Johnny, one thing I always like to end with all of my interviews with people, especially for folks like you who've overcome sickness, you've overcome addiction, I like to give people just a goodbye message of hope. So you got a minute just in your heart, just love on the folks listening. I mean, you have tens of thousands of people all over the world. A lot of folks are absolutely just clueless. They're confused. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to do anything different because they've tried everything. And I recognize, out of everything that was opened up and left when Pandora's box was blown open, it was hope. And without hope, we're gone. We're done for. And I do believe that we could turn things around. So in the context of Smart Fat, in the context of the truth about fat loss, give folks a little bit of hope.
Well, Eric, you're 35 years old. In November of last year, which is 4 months ago, I turned 69. So I'm almost twice your age. And so I have a kind of unique perspective because I tend to be 20 or so years older than most of the other people in the space. I kind of know what it looks like on this end. And I know what's possible at 69. I mentioned that I get up every day without an alarm clock. I'm on the tennis court at 7:45 and I play 2 hours, an hour and a half to 2 hours every day. I have a passionate, loving relationship with my fiance. I don't take any prescription medicines. I take, things that tons of supplements and things that you and I would recognize. But I'm not on any blood pressure medicine, no cholesterol medicine. I wouldn't take it anyway. None of the standard things, nothing for stomach or GERD or heartburn, any of those. And I know it's possible, and I see people who are 10 years younger than me who look like my father and who have given up hope. And I know that if I could come from heroin addiction and cocaine addiction and sex, drugs, and rock and roll and being a musician who was 30 pounds overweight, if I could get here following my heart and my skepticism and kind of figuring out what kind of food really made a difference and what kind of fuel I wanted to put in my body and how I wanted to live my life and how I wanted to, help comport myself and have relationships. If I could figure that out, and I'm not the smartest guy in the room, then you can figure it out too. And you can have maybe not my life, but a life that feels as good to you as mine feels to me. Well said. And that's the message I've wanted to get across every single time I've spoken, every single time I've written a book. I always end with enjoy the journey, because the journey can be amazing. And there's a little added side to that. Beauty, sexiness, energy, vitality come in all sizes. You do not have to wait till you're the perfect weight to have those things. And that's, if I had one legacy message, it would be that.
Wow, that's beautiful. Shalom, my friend. You're such a blessing. I mean, really. Folks, this was awesome.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to thank you for, you're utterly inspiring to so many people. The summits you put on are just amazing. I've signed up for them. I've listened to them. And just you as a person, you're just a genuine, beautiful, glowing soul. And I'm very, very blessed to have met you and to be working with you in this capacity. So thank you.
Likewise, my friend. Likewise. Okay. Well, everyone, you heard it. You heard it from the expert. Actually, I learned something. I didn't realize that Johnny was almost 70 years young. And it's just, I met
Isn't
Johnny.
That scary?
Yeah,
Jesus.
And we met last week for the first time. We virtually, we've known each other for a while in the internet space. Yeah. But wow. Folks, you've heard it. You've been inspired. You've been encouraged. I implore you, take this information home with you. Click on the banner beside or below. Share it with your loved ones. Listen to it again and again. Don't worry about taking notes, because you can just absorb it. This is Johnny's opus magnum. Visit him at johnnybowden.com. All my love and appreciation. Again, this is Dr. Eric Zielinski, folks, and we'll catch you at the summit. Bye-bye.